Are human beings too stupid to manage the planet? Assuming we're even supposed to be managing the Earth. Is there a great app out there to help us with that? Or at least help users live sustainably? We have some thoughts on that on this episode of the Growth Busters podcast.
Calling. Call the Growth Buster. Whoa.
Welcome to the Growth Busters podcast. Here we discuss our society's addiction to growth, and we do our best to chart a sustainable course for human civilization. Now, on a full planet, you know what that means? That means it's time we stop expanding the scale of the human enterprise. We're talking about both our numbers and the size of our economy. Of course, that includes exploring ways to shrink our own individual footprints. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary Growth Busters, Hooked on Growth, and I happen to be chief scientist here at the Institute for Advanced Growth Addiction Studies. For cutting-edge information about our culture's unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it, visit growthbusters.org. I'm joined today by my usual highfalutin partners in growth-busting crime. I'm so glad to see you two, Ben and Caitlin.
I'm glad to be here, possibly for the last time in a while.
Me too.
That could be because you two are graduating and beginning the next chapter of lives.
It's very
true. It's scary. Almost as scary as climate change.
Is it more scary or more exciting?
Exciting for me at the moment.
Yeah, I would say it alternates between the two, but usually exciting.
Well, congratulations. I'm excited too, but I'm a little bummed because that means that I know for absolute sure you're leaving town for the summer. You each have some interesting summer gigs, so you will not be gracing the studio for a few months, but who knows where you will end up after that.
True.
Very true.
So you may be back, or we may just bring you in remotely, or we may just find somebody who's a lot better than you.
There's no one.
Impossible.
We're the pinnacle.
Yeah. And the person we really need to replace, we're stuck with. He's still here. That's Dave Gardner. We'll have to see if we can do something about that too. Well, so number one on our list today is Charles Darwin's great-great-grandson. He says that we don't care about climate change. We don't care about water. We care about ourselves. We want to be slim and healthy. But to our credit, we do care about animal welfare at least. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
Of course, this is just one man's opinion, too.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have a name like Darwin,
Right.
it does.
Yeah, it's funny that his opinion is so elevated because his cool last name.
Yeah, because his great-great-grandfather was the great and powerful Charles Darwin. You know, it's an interesting interview that we read in Raw Story, and Chris Darwin also said, and I think these are some valid points, we aren't programmed to run a planet. We have enough intelligence to get ourselves into trouble, but not enough intelligence to get ourselves out. That sounds a little bit depressing, but he indicated that he doesn't think things are hopeless.
Wait, what did he say he thought the solution was again?
He thinks we need a great leader.
Right.
And that doesn't mean an elected leader, right?
Nope.
Necessarily. And in fact, he kind of has an interesting take on where we should be looking for catalysts of change. You know, he doesn't see government as being at the front of the line.
Yeah, he talks about other paradigm shifts in history and says they occurred because visionary people came out and inspired people. Inspired the masses, actually. Generally, it goes the visionary, the masses, corporations, government. Governments are always last.
Yeah, so that's interesting. But we do need a visionary, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think I agree with the idea that if good things happen, it's going to come from a culture change and not necessarily a policy directive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just somewhat skeptical of finding a uniting world leader to lead that culture change. I don't know.
Me too. I feel like there have been great leaders of other paradigm shifts, but I feel like they come from grassroots, and then there's like sort of a spokesperson whose face gets remembered in history books, but I don't think it's ever really one person who changes history. Like, I think it has to be from a lot of people. But I do agree that governments are probably last.
Yeah, and in fact, his example is, look how long it's taken us to do so little that we've done about climate change so far. So are there visionaries? Are there some candidates, do you think, that come to mind that could be the messiah of sustainability?
I don't know. All of the current leaders I know don't strike me as super charismatic. I mean, like Jill Stein has kind of been running for the Green Party for years, but it doesn't seem like she has that charisma potential of like a Gandhi or I don't know. It doesn't. I feel like if there is someone, we probably don't know their name yet.
I don't know either.
And I have to say the Green Party's been a little bit on the wimpy side.
Oh, they're really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're
very little about them.
You know, they're better than some of the other options, but you know, just like the big environmental NGOs, you know, they know where their bread is buttered. They've got to raise money. They've got to get votes, and so they will only go so far out onto thin ice. For example, the Green Party and Jill Stein haven't really been willing to talk about sustainable population. You know?
No kidding.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
There remains a stunning silence about population and even economic growth, I think, for the Green Party. I don't think the Green Party's yet been willing to say growth. Forget that.
Right. I thought the article, it was interesting. I don't know, like Darwin's tone kind of, especially since they introduced him as very humble in the beginning. Sometimes I thought he seemed a little bit on his high horse, just talking about like other people who just want to be skinny and I feel like there were a couple times where he kind of makes people seem like specific groups of people seem like kind of like dumb and just like not smart and like he can see what's happening, but no one else. I don't know. I thought it was interesting.
But I'm glad that you brought that back up because you know, one of the things that I thought about, especially that comment about that we don't apparently get too excited about saving the world, but we get pretty excited about being slim or getting rock hard abs or something like that. And that made me think about the Growth Busters podcast. You know, we obviously want to be relevant. We want to make a difference. We want to change the world. In order to do that, we need to be heard. You know, we need some kind of a critical mass of people listening to the podcast. And, you know, right now we don't have access to great stats, so we can't tell. But it doesn't look like we're setting the world on fire with tens of thousands of downloads of each episode. But if we were doing a podcast, you know, called Lose 15 Pounds and Get Rock Hard Abs, we'd have listeners out the wazoo. You know, we would.
Right, but I think the answer is not to, like, qualify that as like there's people who would listen to that podcast but not this podcast as like stupid. I don't know, which I feel like
right. I want rock hard abs and to save the world. I feel like I hear you.
Well, and it's just like there's been like that's been like very systematically like drilled into our minds that's like what's important. I don't know. So I think in a different world, if I'd gone to a different college, like I could definitely be one of those people, you know. I just think to categorize them as dumb is unhelpful.
I wasn't as offended as you were by that statement, and I think that was because I really kind of took it to be kind of a species-wide indictment, not that you and you and you and you are too stupid to run the planet, just that humankind is...
I get that, but I think he places himself like above that. It seems to me. I feel like even though he says he's not the one to turn the ship around himself, like I feel like he has a little bit of a like, I can see this so clearly, why is everyone else so stupid and can't see it? I don't know.
Now, Caitlin, I figured this would get your attention because Chris Darwin has keyed in on a subject that you feel is very important.
Yeah. He talks about a couple of things that interested me. Are you talking about the veganism and vegetarianism part?
Sure, for sure. But there's more than that, huh?
Mm-hmm, yeah, there's more than that. Yeah, I think it's also interesting that he says people care about animal welfare. Because I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's true. I guess I don't know what the general population responds to. But in the like circles that I've inhabited, it seems like when I talk about my veganism, people take it a lot more seriously when I talk about climate change than when I talk about animal welfare. And I always think that that's like a little bit sad because I feel like people should care about both. And also like animal welfare is part of climate. Like animals are living beings and we should value them.
And it doesn't seem like we're that excited about species extinction. That doesn't seem to be getting, I mean, certainly people like us who are really living and breathing sustainability, all the time we read about species extinction, but you don't really see, I think, this big wave of public outcry about that.
Yeah, we've separated those two things. Animal welfare is its own category and species extinction is something else, but if species go extinct, that's part of animal welfare too.
Right. Like
Yeah.
whenever, I think that's a question I've asked, and I've definitely heard other people ask when someone says they're vegan. It's like, oh, is it like ethics, like ethically, or like climate change reasons? It's like one or the other, like they're
Right.
distinct.
Yeah. We'll rescue a dog. We'll donate to the Humane Society, but we aren't really worried on a day-to-day basis about the fact that our growing
Right.
city is wiping out habitat and pushing species off.
Well, and I mean, Darwin
Right.
talks about that as he thinks it's like really like bizarre that there are different laws for what you can do to a dog or what you can do to a cat and you can't do to a pig or
Or chicken. Yeah, he talks about chickens. But
Right,
yeah, I
right.
think that's interesting because pigs are more intelligent than dogs. So I've read, at least. But yeah, we have total double standards for those creatures. It's sad.
And I should mention, we'll put a link to this Ross Story interview in the show notes so that you can read the whole thing if you're interested. But what else caught your eye?
Oh, yeah, I thought it was interesting that he talked about the livestock industry taking away the world's grain from the hungry. I think that's another thing that people don't think about often when they think about like vegetarianism is how much we end up feeding animals so that we can eat animals, and we could be feeding the plant-based things that we feed to animals to people. But that would take a really big systematic change because when you're just talking about like coarse grain, there's a lot of work that goes into turning that into food. It's not like quite as simple as a 1-to-1 ratio.
Right.
Yeah,
But,
but I thought it was a pretty interesting perspective that our appetite for meat is outbidding the poor.
Right. Yeah, no, I think people don't think of vegetarianism and veganism as a humanitarian issue. They think of it as an animal rights issue, but it's
Yeah.
totally a humanitarian issue too.
Yeah.
Something that caught my eye, I didn't love the way that he spoke about it, but I think I understand his intent, and I guess, yeah, I wanted to talk about it a little bit and clarify. He talks about overpopulation, and that's obviously something that we talk about a lot on this podcast. And he talks about David Attenborough and how David Attenborough is eloquent and talks about how a lot of overpopulation issues, a lot of it has to do with women's education, because generally if you educate women to have a life beyond raising children, they will have fewer children. So that's very big. And then says, but even so, you look at America, a very fast rate of rising population in America, quite surprising for the Western world. And that bothered me a little bit because I think it's a really specific word choice thing to me, but I think he's not just talking about women's education. I think he's talking about socialization. Like, definitely women and all people deserve equal opportunities for education, and especially health education. Like, everybody deserves to have education on things like contraception. And maybe that's what he means by education, but it sounds to me like he's talking more about socialization, because if you look at the way that women and men are socialized to think about the role of women, even in like America, we still teach very distinctive gender roles, and that a big part of like fulfilling your purpose as a woman involves having children in the West. And that, I think, has less to do with education than with socialization. And it applies to men and women. Men are socialized to treat women as if that's a big part of their purpose in the world too. And so I thought that it was like a little bit demeaning to say that if you educate women to have a life beyond raising children, they'll have less children. Because I think very few women feel like their only purpose in life is raising children naturally. I think that we're taught that that's more miseducation than just lack of information, you know? So that bothered me a little bit.
Yeah, good point. I have to say that he scored a point with me after, because it looked to me like here is this guy is going to be saying, we can save the planet and human civilization if we just stop eating meat. And as you know, I think that's a pretty big impact action that we can take, but I don't think that's nearly enough. And so I was really glad when he was asked about overpopulation that he said, that's the biggest game in town. So I was glad.
Yeah, no, I'm glad he talked about overpopulation.
Well, it was really interesting, though, what he said about David Attenborough, though, how he was like, said he was going to make it more of an issue, and then David Attenborough said because he had kids, he can't talk about it.
That was interesting.
And so how do you get there? I mean, here's a guy, he says, well, I have 3 kids, so I can't talk about it. If he thinks it's the biggest game in town, why does he have 3 kids? Well, I guess it's because he
Had kids
got
before he
religion.
realized.
Right. Well, because he was in advertising before, so I mean, and it sounds like he wasn't all that conscious of. So I mean, just like I don't know. I guess I mean, not similar to you, but that you had kids before you. I don't know.
Yeah, but I did stop it too because I had that awareness. But there are so many people who are I would call sustainable population activists who had more children than they know they should have, and they just didn't know better.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
Right.
that shouldn't exclude you from being an advocate for
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
sustainable population. That would exclude so many people.
yeah. It
Definitely.
strains your credibility a little bit. It gives you some splaining to do.
Well, I mean, I think it's always fair to change your opinion about something. But then I think if you're going to be an advocate, or if you're going to talk about the problems with having too many children, and you've already had children, then you definitely shouldn't be judgmental about it, because you know as well as anybody that it's possible to make mistakes or to not be the perfect sustainable role model. But I think that even if you haven't had children, you shouldn't be judgmental about it. So
Yeah, in some ways it could make you a more effective spokesperson.
Definitely.
right.
Yeah, kind of like the field trips that they used to take. I don't know whether they still do that, where they would take school kids to the penitentiary, and somebody who's doing time for burglary will come and talk to the kids and say, "Hey, I really fouled up my life. Don't make the mistakes I made."
Scared straight.
Yeah, yeah. So Chris Darwin could say, "Hey, don't make the mistakes I made. I had 3 children, and we live in a world today where that's not the responsible thing to do."
Yeah, they should send people who have fulfilled the American dream and have like picket fences and dogs and kids and big houses. They should send those people into schools for Scared Straight
Yeah.
programs.
That would be awesome.
Maybe that's what we need, a new Scared Straight program. But anyway,
Busted
so
straight.
interesting. So found it interesting that Chris Darwin is running an app, the Darwin Challenge app, and the purpose of that is to help us eat a lot less meat. And I had 2 comments about that. One was, well, it was interesting that when he was asked, he didn't say that he thinks everybody needs to go full tilt vegan. He said, if people would just have 4 days a week that are meat free, that he felt like we could probably feed the world.
Yeah,
Of course,
he did say that.
we could get into the weeds with that. We can't, we can't feed the world. We cannot continue doing what we're doing to feed the world. We're creating ocean dead zones and killing the climate. So the truth is that we would need to shrink our population greatly too.
And just change a lot of our systems. I think that there are a lot of steps that people can take, and veganism is one of them. But I just think all of these things are so deeply connected with each other. Like I don't think any one thing can
Yeah.
feed the world or like stop climate change on its own, which is how I used to feel about veganism, but I don't anymore. I think it involves so much more systematic change than that.
Good point. Just reading about his app, though, made me stop and wonder, wow, I wonder how many apps there are out there that are designed to help people live more sustainably. Because one of the things we've talked about a lot of times when we're doing our Lightening the Loads segment, I know I've talked about my wish that people would go through their everyday life with, a greater awareness, so that they were questioning almost everything they did, that it just comes naturally to you to not sit there with the motor running while you're talking to a friend in the driveway, or I'm constantly looking for ways to to shrink my footprint. I just can't help it, and I'm a freak. I'm not normal. And so I was wondering whether there are a bunch of apps out there and whether they might be effective ways to help people just have it on their radar screen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting to me because I think it's part of a larger, like a trend, which I think is interesting, of the industry of greenness. I don't know. And it's interesting to think about, of like whether that's beneficial or not, of like these people like,
or both.
Yeah, or it's definitely both. I don't know. It's just something that I think is very interesting now, that there's a huge advantage to
Marketing as green.
Marketing as green, or coming up with a green app, or I don't know. It's interesting.
No, I think it's definitely non-linear progress, because it's definitely helping people in some ways, but also if the incentive that's causing companies to market as green or go green is still economic growth, then obviously that isn't perfect yet.
Yeah. So anyway, I Googled to see whether there were a bunch of lists out there, reviews of sustainability apps, and there were several. And in fact, the one I pulled up, the one that I'll actually give you a link to, probably isn't even the best list. But I guess I liked it because it just had 5 apps. The article that I found was called Go Green and Celebrate Nature with These 5 Apps, and it was actually at the Google Play Store. So they just narrowed it down to 5 apps, and one of them was Julebug, which I went ahead and downloaded and have been playing with a little bit this week. And in Julebug, I actually made a commitment to have 4 meat-free days a week, which was easy for me because I think I pretty much do about 5 meat-free days a week anyway. So it's not necessarily pushing me, but there's a lot of other commitments that I could make that would push me, and you get points for accomplishing, it actually beeps me at 8 o'clock every night and says, well, was today a meat-free day? And I could set it up to remind me and ask me if I did something else, if I'd made other commitments. And so on that particular app, they've got a long list of actions, and they have oversimplified data to help you figure out, whether you're inspired to do this action. You'll save this many gallons of gasoline in a year if you telecommute. Telecommuting was one example. Save this many gallons of gasoline, avoid this many kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions in a year. And of course, it's oversimplified because everybody's decision to telecommute is going to have a whole lot of different factors in there. But anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting one. Some of the others on that list of 5, I wasn't that impressed with. 2 of them I didn't even bother to write down, but there was one called Scoop, which is a carpooling app. There's probably God knows how many carpooling apps out there, but it seems like a really great tool to make it easier for people to not have one person driving in their car. And then there was one called Let Go, where you buy and sell used stuff.
Cool.
Which seemed to make sense.
Well, I really like the idea of Joule, just because I think, I mean, there are a lot of studies that say if you write down your goals, you're way more likely to accomplish them. And I think that's a trap I fall into sometimes, is I just kind of make like nebulous goals in my head of like, I'm going to be green and like make good choices. But like if you write it down in the app and be like, this is a quantifiable goal that I want to accomplish, I think you're probably much more likely to actually accomplish that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't have time, and I'm not sure I have the patience to get enough experience with this app to really figure out whether it's doing what I think they set out to do. It seems like it's kind of a good notion, which is to make it so that you can, ask your friends or invite your friends to get the app too, and you can compare how you're doing with your friends, and you can even have teams, and companies can sign up and
cool.
do company versions. I'm not convinced that is really going to work, but I found it interesting just because I do think that peer pressure can be a pretty effective. Yeah.
Well, and it's cool that it's peer pressure in a positive way. It's trying to make it fun and like a game and enjoyable to do. And I think even if it doesn't work, I think it's a really cool idea.
I've always thought if you had a big flashing sign on the front of your house that told all your neighbors how much electricity you were wasting every day, you would waste less electricity, You'd be a little bit ashamed. And that's a kind of an over-the-top example, but I found myself wondering whether an app like this Julebug, could that be at play?
Well, I like the idea that companies could sign up together too, because I don't know if this would be like the most effective, but I feel like a lot of apps like that, or even they're like fitness apps, and it's like, how many calories did you burn this week? Compare with your friends, and it's all based around competition. But I feel like with something like trying to reduce your carbon footprint, it would be cool if the app was collaborative, so you could sign up as a team and try to have a goal to meet, because this is a hugely collaborative issue. But I feel like people respond much at least in our hyper-competitive U.S. culture, much better to competition than
now that you're talking
collaboration.
about competition, it makes me think of an app like that where it's like you set up a dollar amount, and so it's like, yeah, I just have some friends who do it for going to the gym, but you could do it for green things as well, where each day you put in $1, and then like whoever goes to the gym the most over a 1 month period wins all of the money. So you could do it like that with something green. It'd be very interesting.
So let me ask you, you two are young. I'm old, 1 foot in the grave. So we know, I'm not really targeting old farts like me, trying to get them to change their ways, because that's tough. I think it's a lot easier to reach and inspire and motivate young adults. You don't have 50 years of programming and socialization yet to turn you into super consumers who think the American dream is to die with all the toys. But so I want to ask you, so what's your sense about these apps? I mean, is this something that could fire up your generation and really be useful?
I think so. I think there's the potential for that. I don't, not myself personally, but I think in general, I think there's a possibility. I don't know. I think a lot of the apps like have a very good sense of psychology kind of, and yeah, with like the rewards and like pins and stuff has been in general shown to be a very effective way of getting people to do things in general, like not good things. Like Facebook kind of has that down pat. But I think there's a potential. I don't think to be the answer, but I think to be an effective tool. I think there's definitely potential there.
Yeah, I think if it's well marketed, definitely. And if there's something unique about it, I think, yeah, people get excited about that. I also feel like there's about to be maybe a really substantial change when it comes to screens and the amount of time that we spend on our screen. More and more people are looking to spend less time on screens. I think that there are going to be phones that come out in future years that will have access to fewer apps that people will be invested in.
I'm so excited. Are you talking about the light phone too?
Yeah.
Where you can edit this out if you want, but we're really excited about this phone that it's uses the same technology as Kindles. It's like e-ink instead of like an LED screen. So you know how like a Kindle, it's just like black and white, and so it'd be like that, but it's a smartphone, but it only has access to like 5 apps. So you'd have like a web, and then there might be like Uber and Spotify
music and maps,
and that's it. So you can't get all this other junk that you just waste all your time on, which is what I hate about smartphones. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited about it. I hope it's as good as it's hyped to be.
But I think that's not completely irrelevant either, because I think if people are spending less time, I don't know. I think that's I think our generation, it's cool in our generation to care about the environment. Like that's the ideology that a lot of us were raised on, I think. I mean, that's a big millennial stereotype, if nothing else, that we're environmentally and socially conscious. And I feel like we think harder about our behavior when we're spending less time on devices that reaffirm that we're always doing the right thing by like sharing something or retweeting or liking something. So I feel like even if people don't use these apps, if the reason that they don't use the apps is because they're spending less time on devices, they might just be better citizens of the earth anyway.
Yeah, we had a really like apocalyptic moment, or at least it felt that way for me when not apocalyptic, but like a very weird society moment when we were at a barbecue last weekend, and it was like 6:30 or something, and we were hanging out and playing games and stuff, and then all of a sudden, literally everyone except me and Caitlin pulls their phone out, and it's this like trivia game that happens
it's called HQ. It's very popular.
Yeah, it happens precisely at 6:30 every night, and so it's like live streamed, and you have to answer it like at the right time, and if you get like 12 correct or something, you can win $50 or something. But it was just creepy because it was me and Caitlin were literally the only people of 15 people at this party who weren't like, they were crowded around each other in a huddle. Everyone's looking at their phones, and we were like, oh my god, it's like an episode of Black Mirror. It was freaky.
Yeah,
sounds like a bunch of zombies almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Man.
And I don't mean to be like higher than thou. I don't know, but I don't know. It was just a weird moment.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be better ways to use this peer pressure and the power of positive group influence. And I'm thinking, it's making me think of like transition towns. You know, if you have a transition town in your community, you should look and see, because there's probably a potluck at least once a month.
Yeah.
There might be a movie night once a month, and there's various projects, and you get together and you're not staring at a screen, but you're hanging out with other people.
What are
Who
these?
cares? Yeah.
Yeah.
What are these transition towns?
Transition towns, yeah. It's part of the Transition Network. You can
Right.
go to transitionnetwork.org or transitionus.org, or if you're in the United States. And
It's a big
I hadn't
sustainability
heard about them.
movement.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
yeah, they're cool. They're an experiment trying to figure out how to reinvent our system, you know,
That's
in
really
a way
cool.
that is
Yeah.
going to be sustainable.
Yeah, I think
awesome.
building community face to face around issues like this will actually be the most effective way to create change. When you're accountable to an app or to yourself, I don't think that you always make the best decisions, but when you're accountable to another person who you know
Yeah.
has a stake, I think you're less likely to let them down.
And you can always lie to your app,
Right.
unless it's measuring whether you walked or rode your
Right,
bicycle or
like
something like that.
just-
There
yeah.
might be some physical things that would be
Right.
hard to game the system on, but
Right.
it'd be easy enough to tell it, yeah, I didn't eat a hamburger today.
Right.
But why?
In my experience, social media that's focused on sustainability or just like any justice issue, it's really good at making me feel like I'm not doing enough, but very, very bad at catalyzing me into action. It's more paralyzing than anything, because it's like, I'm never going to be doing enough. Like, there are so many issues and I can't effectively change all of them. And I think it just draws my attention to how much I'm not doing more than motivating me to do more.
We really probably need to be thinking about moving into our next segment, lightening the load. But I have this one other interesting news tidbit that'll just take a second to talk about. And that is, there is a new magazine called Pod Papers. It's a printed magazine where you don't have to listen to your favorite podcasts. You can read them on paper. And because this is a podcast and it's about sustainability, I thought that this would be interesting. And this was the idea of the Paper and Packaging Board, an industry group that works to help slow the decline in paper use
Oh my god!
and expand demand for paper-based packaging products.
That is so funny. Oh my god, that exists.
Why wouldn't it be? I mean, and there's
Right, of course.
a
lobbies
trade group for
everything.
every
Yeah.
industry, and of course they do not want change. They want
Yeah.
us to keep on using
Right.
way too much of whatever it is that they sell.
I'm reading a book right now about the lobbyists for the coroners industry, and they're super strong apparently. It's fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is weird. So anyways, I hope Pod Papers isn't successful. I really don't think we need to be converting recorded podcasts into...
Yeah, I was
Paper.
at first when you mentioned that, I was at first excited. Because I think it's like, I don't know, I like books a lot and I don't listen to podcasts all that often.
Oh, so this would be right up your alley.
Yeah,
Shoot.
but I agree. I think we should try to keep books, but I don't think we need to convert podcasts into paper.
Right.
Of course, I'm assuming that it is a lot lighter on the planet to listen to a podcast on your iPhone or Shuffle or whatever your little device is than it is to manufacture
Yeah.
paper and print that on paper and then read it on paper.
I think it probably depends on how you like depreciate out the cost of like the asset. Like if you're buying a computer solely to listen to podcasts, then it would probably be better to read it on paper. But no one's doing that.
Yeah,
So
the math would be
Right.
very complicated. But I do want to just point out that, you know, just because you're using an electronic device instead of killing a
Right.
tree, that, you know, somehow the electricity is being generated for that device, and that device had to be
True.
manufactured and all that. But, you know, when you can read 2,000 books on one Kindle, the Kindle's
I love my
got to
Kindle.
beat the books. All right, shall we move on to lightning the load?
Yeah.
Well, I'll go first since mine kind of ties in pretty well with what we've been talking about.
Great.
Again, at the risk of trying not to sound like higher than thou, because I get a lot of shit for this, I recently switched to having a flip phone instead of a smartphone.
Wow.
Like 7 or 8 months ago, and I really love it. And I think it's an environmentally good choice in a weird way. And just because, a lot of the smartphones now are like intentionally built with planned obsolescence. Like the companies that are manufacturing these smartphones want it to be so that in a year or 2 years, you're not going to want to keep your phone anymore. And I know that when I had smartphones, every 3 years or so, I'd get a new phone, and I think that seems pretty consistent, at least with our generation. Whereas a lot of the dumb phones, like my phone is built like a brick, and you can leave it in a sandstorm theoretically, and there's no real reason to need an upgrade just because it just sends text messages and does calls, and should be able to do that for the next 10 years. It's also less of an environmental strain in materials.
But what are you going to do with yourself on Friday night when you go out with your friends and everybody else is sitting at the table staring at their smartphone?
I'll cry when I think about the apocalypse.
You're going to be so lonely, Ben.
You still have at least one other person to talk to.
It's very true. But it's funny.
So far.
It's funny the reactions I get because people are like shocked, and it makes some people angry. Like my sister gets angry about it. Like she's, oh, now you always have to rely on everybody else, and like I don't know. It's just funny that people get really upset.
Yeah, that is funny. People forget also that phones and computers have raw materials in them that are really environmentally intensive.
And super rare. They're
and rare,
like rare earth metals.
Yep, pretty bad stuff. Yep.
Yeah.
Even the big batteries that are making it so that solar farms are feasible. There's a lot of nasty stuff in the batteries in your hybrid car, et cetera, et cetera.
If you are going to have a smartphone, or I guess any form of a phone, it is good to remember that there are phone recycling place. You can take your phone to a lot of cell phone stores, and sometimes they'll even give you a small amount of money for you to turn your phone into them, and then they'll reuse some of those materials. So if you're going to stay on the smartphone train, at least do that. But,
that's really smart.
Yeah.
I think I'll offer to go next because I think mine is a good segue. In fact, I'm actually changing mine from what I had planned because I was reminded about the batteries and about the raw materials that have to be extracted, pretty rare, and all of the waste of batteries that are not good anymore, that you got to replace the battery. Although most of the time these days, I guess most people just replace the device. They don't even replace the battery, which is even worse. So in my obsessive compulsive way of living, where I'm trying to, do all the crazy little things I can to lighten the load I have on the planet, I am obsessive compulsive about not using batteries any more than necessary. So my cell phone, I'll turn off Wi-Fi if I walk out the door and I'm going to be gone all day and I'm not going to be in a bunch of places where I can use Wi-Fi. I just turn off Wi-Fi because I know that'll draw less power. And so I won't have to charge the battery as soon. So one, I don't have to charge the battery as often and use electricity, which is still some 30% of it or more is generated by burning coal. And then also that battery will last longer before I have to replace that battery. And I do the same thing with my laptop. If I can possibly plug my laptop into shore power, I do, because I do not want to have to buy a new battery for that laptop every year. I just don't think that's good for the planet. It's certainly not good for my pocketbook. And as a result, my current MacBook Pro is over 3 years old. I haven't replaced that battery.
Nice.
And a lot of people go through batteries on laptops a lot faster than that. So that's my lightening the load is don't run a device on battery if you don't have to.
Yeah, sometimes I just put my phone in airplane mode. If I know, like if I'm in class and I'm not going to need it for a few hours, might as well have it use up less battery.
That's
smart.
That's the other great thing about dumb phones. If I'm going on a trip somewhere and it's shorter than a week and a half, I just don't bring a charger because my battery lasts that long. It's pretty wild.
It's awesome.
Wow. It's been a long time since I had that experience.
It's so nice, yeah.
Pretty cool.
Sounds nice. Wow.
What have you got?
I have something that I've been thinking about this week because it's been really, really hot outside here in Colorado Springs, is how I manage to avoid using an air conditioner, even though I live in an attic of my house, which is a really, really, really hot room. There are windows, and I just open a window at night and close it in the morning, and it keeps it cool enough that I don't need to run air conditioner. And I know that like so many people have houses that are just automatically set to be air conditioned all day, even if they're not home. I don't spend most of the day in my house or in my room. Maybe if I did, that would affect things differently. But I think it's, good to remember how much electricity that uses and avoid it if you can.
And it's expensive.
It's very expensive, yeah.
Bless you. That is awesome. That is great. And that's actually one of the actions you can commit to do on the JoulBug application is to not run your air conditioning.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, part of it is definitely just that I can't afford it. But even if I could, now I know that I wouldn't have to.
There you go. Well, there's a chance that this is, this could be the last time we hear from Caitlin and Ben on the Growth Busters podcast. I doubt it a little bit, but you never know. And so I don't want to make the mistake of just being sure you're coming back and not making a big deal about your last one for a while anyway. And I just want to thank you and tell you both, Caitlin Hickman and Ben Bacher, that I think Growth Busters got lucky in that we somehow stumbled upon two really sensitive, thinking, caring. I mean, there's plenty of people in the world like that, and you probably have plenty of friends down at the college like that, but I think you're pretty exceptional in that department, and more so than most. And I just want to thank you for bringing that to the basement studio here once a month or so and sharing it with the world. It's really been quite a ride.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it really has.
Thanks, Dave.
I can't believe it was only a year ago that we met, almost exactly a year ago that we first met.
Yeah.
Seems like so much longer.
I've learned a lot about sustainability in the past year.
A lot of water's gone under that bridge. And you guys have definitely pulled me up short a few times and broadened my horizons and made me ashamed when I need to be ashamed and made me proud when I can be proud. And it's been fun. We
scheduled an appointment at the tattoo parlor. We're all going to get Growth Busters tattoos right after this.
How cool is that? Let's go. Before we go, I have a favor to ask of you. I'd like to find out what you think we're doing right on this podcast. And I'd like to know what bugs you, what you wish we'd do, or what you think we could do better. I invite you to join a one-time listener focus group to share your thoughts. If you'd be willing to give us your opinion, please send an email to podcast@growthbusters.org and let me know. Well, that's it for the Growth Busters podcast. Don't forget to explore issues at growthbusters.org, subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app, and give us a review if you like what we're doing. If you haven't seen the documentary Growth Busters Hooked on Growth, it's easy enough to find at growthbustersmovie.org or on Amazon.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather, but no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling.